In part one, I told you the story the way it usually gets told. 6 kids, 2 men in suits, a strange DC commune called the Finders, and then silence. In this episode, we're doing something different. We're going into the paperwork, the memos, the FBI vault files, the custom reports, and we're going to separate what's actually in the record from what people think it means. And I need to start with correcting myself. Last time I said the Justice Department had officially declared the Finders an intelligence operation. That's not what the documents say. The real story is messier, and honestly, more unsettling. I want you to hold 2 columns in your head for this whole episode. Column A is what government documents and contemporaneous reports say on paper. Column B is what people, agents, congressmen, journalists, conspiracy theorists believe that paper implies. But don't worry, we're going to stay disciplined about which column we're in at any given moment. Column A's first example. In 1987, U.S. Customs Special Agent Ramon J. Martinez writes up a memo about the Finders case. In that memo, he says a DC officer told him the investigation had become a CIA internal matter. He writes that an individual further advised him that the CIA had admitted to owning the Finders organization as a front for a domestic computer training operation, but that it had gone bad. Those are his words on paper. Column B is what people did with that line. Over time, an officer told a customs agent that CIA had admitted owning the Finders as a front. It gets flattened into DOJ declared the Finders a CIA operation. That's what I repeated in part 1, and that goes too far. Because years later, after 2 members of Congress pushed for answers, DOJ and CIA produced their own review. In that later set of documents, the CIA says, no, we didn't own the Finders. We used a private contractor called Future Enterprises for computer training. A member of the Finders worked there as an accountant. That's it. No front, no project. So for this episode, I'm going to be precise. A customs agent's memo and some press reports say one thing. The later DOJ CIA story says another. Both are official on paper, but they both can't be completely right. Same thing with the evidence. In part 1, I talked about evidence disappearing and suggested agents were told to back off because of national security. That's the popular version. Column A is narrower and stranger. In his 1987 write-up, Martinez says that when he went into a Finder's property, he saw computer files and documents with detailed instructions for obtaining children, including impregnation of female Finders members, purchasing children, trading children, and kidnapping. He describes cages at the group's rural property, allegedly used to confine children. He notes that at one point he was told the case had become a CIA internal matter, and that reports had been classified secret. Years later, in the FBI's own Washington field office review, the 324-page file the Bureau put into its online vault, agents say they went back to the DC police property room. They compared what Martinez remembered to what was actually logged. And the MPD detective tells them flatly that none of the items mentioned by Martinez existed in the items seized. And that Martinez was present for the searches, so those items could not have been missed. The FBI file just records the contradiction and moves on. So instead of saying the evidence vanished, column A says a frontline agent swears he saw certain photos and documents. The property records and a later FBI review says those items were never logged at all. It's a documented discrepancy, not a provable destruction. That's scarier in a way because you can't resolve it. One more cleanup. I've said 600 plus pages declassified in 2019. Technically, the core FBI Finders file everyone passed around is a 324-page Washington field office section. The vault listings get over 600 pages because it includes additional PDFs and duplicates attached to the main run. So when you hear 600 pages, think a 324-page backbone plus related material hanging off of it. Now, let's go back to where the paper trail really starts. Tallahassee, Florida, February 1987. Column A on paper, it looks like this. Tallahassee police get an anonymous call about 2 white men in a van at Myers Park with 6 dirty, poorly clothed children. Some later summaries describe the kids as almost feral, unfamiliar with indoor bathrooms, wanting to go outside to relieve themselves, anxious in a house. Officers respond, see the condition of the children, and arrest the men. The men are identified as Douglas Ammerman and Michael Holwell. Spellings vary in early reporting, but they're connected to an intentional community inside Washington, D.C. known as the Finders. They're initially charged with child abuse. Later, 5 women come forward, say they're the mothers, and tell authorities that this was a planned, consented educational trip. Eventually, the child abuse charges were dropped. Medical and psychological exams on the kids note some red flags. One vault summary mentions behavior and certain findings described as consistent with sexual abuse, but no federal charges ever result from those exams. Again, the wording in the file consistent with, not a conviction. Meanwhile, back in DC, U.S. Customs gets looped in. Martinez is asked to assist because of potential child pornography or trafficking angles. In his report, when DC police execute warrants at 2 Finders locations, he says he walks into something that looks less like a hippie commune and more like a low-budget operations center. He describes extensive computer equipment, teletypes or telex machines, and communications referencing international trade and travel. He says there are documents and computer files with detailed instructions for obtaining children, impregnation, purchase, trading, kidnapping. He mentions a wall-sized map under floodlights and a room devoted to video equipment and photographs. At a rural farm, he says he sees cages or enclosures that he's told were used to confine children during visits. Those details are why the Finders file lives on. They're not internet embellishments. They are any customs agent's contemporaneous memo, which later FBI documents explicitly reference. That is column A. Now we get to the part where column A starts to fight with itself. The CIA angle. In 1987, Martinez writes that an individual tells him the FBI has pulled out. The FBI's Foreign Counterintelligence section told DC police not to brief the local FBI field office, and that the whole thing has become a CIA internal matter. He adds that he was told the agency had admitted to owning the Finders organization as a front for domestic computer training operation, but it had gone bad. That front gone bad language is like gasoline. It's been cited in alternative media, in conspiracy forums, and even in mainstream pieces as the smoking gun that the Finders were a CIA project. But when you follow that thread forward into the 1990s, you hit a different set of documents. In 1993, a man named Henry Skip Clements pushed this story into the political bloodstream. He gets a hold of a customs report mentioning that the Finders investigation was dropped as a CIA matter, and he takes it to Congress. 2 representatives, Tom Lewis and Charlie Rose, pressed the Justice Department about whether the CIA used the Finders as a front and whether federal authorities shut the case down. In response, DOJ and CIA conducted a review. Column A here says yes, CIA did send personnel to a company called Future Enterprises for computer training. Yes, a member of the Finders worked there as a part-time accountant. But the CIA insists Future Enterprises was just a private contractor. The official line is that there was no CIA ownership of the Finders, no operational control, and no cover-up. So you end up with this very uncomfortable picture. On one side, you have a customs agent's memo that says somebody told him CIA admitted owning the Finders as a front and that the case had become an internal CIA matter. On the other, you have the CIA and DOJ later saying this was all a misunderstanding involving a contractor and one employee who happened to be a Finder. If you're in column B, the inference column, that gap is where suspicion lives. But the important part for us is that Both statements exist in the official records. Whatever happened, the story changes between 1987 and the early 1990s. Now let's talk about the FBI. If you've only listened to the way this case gets discussed online, you might think the Bureau just walked away in 1987 and never looked back. The vault file tells a different story. In the 1990s and early 2000s, the FBI Washington field office does a retrospective review of the Finders case. Agents go back through old reports, they pull customs material, they look at DC police logs, they attach press clippings. In other words, they reconstruct the investigation on paper. Crucially, they also circle back to the Martinez issue. One section of the vault file explains that the WFO case agent confronted blank, a heavily redacted reference, but clearly Martinez, on February 19th, 1987, about the items he had claimed to have seen. The file says he maintained that he believed he had seen those items and would contact MPD about them. The WFO agent then contacts the MPD detective, who says none of those items existed in the seized evidence. That's where the FBI file leaves it. One agent's memory versus one detective's property room. Then comes the Bureau's bottom line. In its summary, the Washington field office characterizes the Finders as essentially an alternative lifestyle group. It states that no violations of federal law were found and that the investigation was vacated. Another section directly acknowledges allegations that the Finders were involved in well-organized child abuse scheme. And that, in conjunction with the State Department and the FBI Foreign Counterintelligence, there was a conspiracy to cover that up. The WFO states those allegations were not substantiated. So, in column A, the FBI can say, we looked, we documented the accusations, we checked the evidence logs, and we didn't find a federal crime we could charge. In column B, you have a perfectly reasonable question. How do you go from kids, cages, alleged instructions on buying and kidnapping children, a supposed CIA front, and unresolved discrepancy about missing evidence to no federal laws were violated and case closed? At this point, it helps to lay it out nakedly. Column A, what's confirmed on paper. Column B, what's plausible but not proven. Column A includes 6 children found in Tallahassee with 2 members of the Finders in poor condition, leading to initial child abuse charges that were later dropped when mothers appear and defend the trip. A customs agent's 1987 memo describing computer files and documents with instructions for obtaining children by impregnation, purchasing, trading, and kidnapping. Plus, Cages had a rural property and a statement that the investigation had become a CIA internal matter. CIA's documented use of Future Enterprises as a private contractor for computer training, and the fact that at least one Finders member worked there as an accountant. A later DOJ CIA review that denies CIA ownership or operational control of the Finders, framing the connection as a misunderstanding about a contractor. An FBI Washington field office review that re-examines the case, notes the unresolved contradictions about items Martinez says he saw, concludes no federal laws were violated, and formally vacates the investigation while stating the cover-up allegations were not substantiated. Column B is where the hypothesis lives, that the Finders, as a group, were a deliberate, ongoing CIA project, rather than a fringe community with one or more members touching a CIA contractor is an inference. The documents give you a customs quote and a contractor. They do not give you a written tasking order. That evidence was deliberately destroyed or scrubbed is an inference. The record proves a conflict between one agent's recollection and one police property log. It does not prove who is lying, or that anything was intentionally removed. That the group ran a large-scale international child trafficking network is an inference. The files showed disturbing material, strange travel, and troubling behavior, but not a mapped-out trafficking enterprise that survives evidentiary standards in federal court. I'm not saying column B is wrong. I'm saying that if you're going to argue for it, you need to be honest that you've stepped off the trail of what's written and onto what those writings might imply. why does any of this still matter? Part of the answer is cultural. In the 2010s, outlets like Vice called the Finders case Patient Zero for a whole wave of elite pedophile conspiracy culture. Real files, real redaction, real intel connections, and an ending that looks like a shrug. That's a perfect seed for Pizzagate, for Epstein speculation, for the feeling that when children and powerful people collide, the truth gets buried. But part of the answer is structural. You can read every page of the FBI vault file and come away with one chilling bureaucratic fact. A case involving children, cages, allegations of instructions on buying, kidnapping kids, and supposed CIA front can be closed. Not by a jury, not by a hearing, but by an internal memo that says no federal laws were violated, and an instruction to vacate the investigation. And if that can happen once, in a case this weird, with this much paper, what else is getting decided that way, quietly and out of sight? I'm Kyle Fields. We'll see you next week.